All right, greetings. Welcome back to Black Bear News, where everything is connected. And the viewers are smarter than the average bear. What's up, Real Going South? Saying hello from Rumble. What's up? We're on Rumble, Rockfin, and on the YouTube. And we're just kind of ending the week on a mellow vibe. We're gonna do a little book reading, and it's been a little while. It's actually been far too long. I'm supposed to be doing these on a more regular basis, and that's just not really happening. Hopefully, my sound is good. If my sound is not good, please let me know. It's a rainy day and night. I could really go for some rainy day and night myself. It's hot as blazes. Once again. But I think the end of the week, or next week, is supposed to cool off a little bit. All right. Well, let's get into it. It's been a while. We left off at chapter 37, and we're going to get into chapter 38 from The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. Great book, as you all know. Today we're here to discuss potential alternatives. I wanted to, before I start, wanted to thank Zalipa and Lou for the donations on PayPal. Thank you, Zalipa and Lou. All right. Today we're here to discuss potential alternatives to the global neoliberal order, which seems to be in such imminent danger of collapse. Are there any already existing alternatives we can look to? China, obviously. But China seems very deeply implicated in the global economy. They have a command economy that overrules the free market to bolster Chinese interests. That's so interesting. What could we call such a mysterious new amalgam? Socialism. I think I remember reading this chapter before, and this is a great one. Oh my, how very transgressive of you, not to say nostalgic. But I seem to recall that China is always careful to add the phrase, with Chinese characteristics, whenever they use the word socialism. And it seems to many that those Chinese characteristics make for a completely new thing. Yes, but no. You don't agree? No, it's socialism with Chinese characteristics. These characteristics including a huge dollop of capitalism, it seems. Yes, so might we learn things from them? No. How come? Because we don't like them. Isn't that rather prejudiced of us? They don't seem to like us either. So no hope of change from that quarter. What about the poor? The 4 billion poorest people alive have less wealth than the richest 10 people on the planet. So they're not very powerful, but no one can deny that there are a lot of them. Might they force change from below? There are guns in their faces. What about the so-called precariat, then? Those middle billions just scraping by, what Americans still call the middle class, speaking of nostalgia. Could they rise up and change things by way of some kind of mass action? Guns in their faces, too. And yet we do sometimes see demonstrations, sometimes quite large ones. Demonstrations are parties. People party and then go home. Nothing changes. Well, but what about coordinated mass action? That sounds like more than partying to me. The so-called fiscal strike that we hear so much about, leading to a financial crash, and the subsequent nationalization of the banks, for instance. National governments would then be back in control, coordinating a complete takeover of global finance. You know, the one we hear so much about. They could rewrite the WTO rules and create some kind of quantitative easing, giving new fiat money to Green New Deal type causes. We call that legislation. So again, we come back to legislatures. These are usually thought to be features of representative democracies. To the extent that such democracies still exist, if they ever did, their legislatures would have to be voted in by voting majorities, by definition. 51% at the least, or more if possible, in all the major countries where such systems obtain. They would all have to join the plan. Yes. So this seems quite practical. What keeps us from doing that? People are stupid. Also, the rich will fight it. Again, the presumption that the rich have more power than the poor. Yes. But might it also be the case that there would be some kind of systemic resistance to changes also, in that all these laws that need to change are intertwined and therefore can't be easily detangled? Yes. You could even say that money itself would resist this change. Indeed, it seems to be the case that there's simply a kind of inherent, inbuilt resistance to change. Constipation is a bitch. Sometimes you just have to sit on the box and push harder. Well put. I guess you could call that story the story of our decade, or the entire country for that matter, or century for that matter, sorry. Why stop then? Or why stop there? Such a trenchant image for history, I must say. Tremendous relief when all that shit is out of you. No doubt. Well, that about wraps it up for this week. Perhaps it's time to pull down our pants and have a seat. I invite everyone listening to join us next week, this same time. It might take longer. All right, that was chapter, whoops. I don't know why I did that. Chapter 38. Moving on to chapter 39. As people kind of get in here, I did want to say for these book readings, I ask that everybody, if they can, donate $1 or more via the direct donation links below or in the description box of all the channels that this is on. Let's continue. Chapter 39. Davos is one of my favorite parties. The World Economic Forum, held every year at the end of January. Maybe I need some tea. Tea is good. Davos is one of my favorite parties. The World Economic Forum, held every year at the end of January. It's touted as an international gathering of power brokers, those stateless elites who come to congratulate themselves and talk about how their plans for the future will make everything all right, especially for the elites themselves, who sometimes get called Davos man, that newly emergent subspecies of Homo sapiens, 80% male and in the top 10% of the top 1% when it comes to personal wealth, among other attributes. All true. And thus, of course, a great party. Even though some people think the partying itself is kind of sedate, despite the great liquor. Once, some years ago, Mick Jagger was spotted dancing by himself to a jukebox in the corner. He was bored. But most of the people in attendance are happy just to be there and get seen by all the others. Davos meets for a week, though few stay for the whole thing. About 2,500 businessmen and political leaders, with a few entertainers added for entertainment purposes, thus Jagger. The days of the conference are devoted to panel discussions and long meals, and all the problems of the day get discussed. Mainly variations on the theme of riding herd on an increasingly fractious world by helping those most in need. Charity, Inc. With immense effort, the percentage of women there has gone from 6% to 24%, we were told, and the organizers congratulated themselves on this progress and promised to keep working on the problem, which was difficult to solve, as most wealthy people and most political leaders are just by coincidence male. This may be one reason Jagger was bored. Security costs for the conference are shared by the organizers and the Swiss canton of Graubünden, plus the Swiss federal government. Some in Switzerland criticize the cost of this, but then again, if the annual meeting of the rulers of the world wants to be in Switzerland, this probably helps Switzerland hold on to its weird position as one of the wealthiest countries on earth, despite having nothing at all to base that on. Maybe the beauty of the Alps and the brains of its people, but I'm dubious about both. Call me doubtful in Davos. There used to be protests at Davos, but not now. For one thing, the town is hard to get to and easy to defend. For another, the conference is more and more regarded as irrelevant. Just a bunch of rich guys partying, which is true, as I said. So protests had mostly gone away. This perhaps represented an opportunity, or so people said afterward. At this particular meeting, we had just gathered and gotten down to the serious business of eating and drinking and talking, when the power went off and we were left in the dark. Generators, we shouted merrily. Turn on the frickin' generators. But not, and the security people were suddenly seen to be not the same security people. There were new ones in masks, guarding us in a different sense than we had been guarded before. We all said, "What the fuck?" and they ignored us. We all tried to get outside and see what was happening. No luck. Doors all locked. This whole town was physically closed. After a couple of hours, word spread that the Swiss road stoppers, installed the century before to foil Nazi and Soviet tank invasions, had popped up out of the pavement like giant shark's teeth all over the valley and up in the few road passes in and out of the valley. And the airport and heliports in the area were all dark and similarly studded with shark's teeth. Even the alpine mountain trails into the valley were said to be foamed with some kind of instant concrete that made the trails temporarily impassable. And the security on hand was there to guard us in this new way. They would not respond to us. We could hear the airspace over the town humming with circling drones, and people said they had clustered on a few approaching helicopters and forced them away, including a couple of crashes. This thing is finally getting interesting, someone said, but most of us thought it was getting too interesting. Announcements over loudspeakers were made to the effect that we would not be harmed and would be released to the world at the end of the week. Only the schedule of events was being hijacked. We were told, not we ourselves. Although obviously this was not true, as we were all quick to point out, but to no one, as all the guards on hand were helmeted with visors down, and not responding to us in any way unless someone assaulted one, in which case the response was decisive and unpleasant, in the usual fashions seen on news clips. Clubs, pepper spray, dragged off to small rooms to chill. People stopped trying that. And the loudspeakers were not replying to our objections. Then the services started breaking down. In particular, the plumbing stopped working. And we had to improvise a system for relieving ourselves. Shit. Poor Davos. There was no recourse but to head out into the woods and do it. So a fair amount of shit was distributed around the town, but quickly we created a new system of impromptu sort of latrines and made do as best we could. Then the taps stopped running, which, to tell the truth, was kind of scary. You can always shit in the woods, but you can't live on whiskey, much as some people try. Some were pleased to stay hydrated entirely on $4,000 bottles of wine, of which there were many on hand. But turned out there were also 2 alpine streams crashing down through the town in stone-walled channels, sometimes tunnels, under street, but often just deep stone-walled channels. So we made use of some buckets someone found and drank from these streams, either boiling the water or not. It looked clean to me. Snow just hours before. Food was provided in boxes, and we were allowed into the town's various kitchens to cook for ourselves. We coped with that and were proud of ourselves for doing so. It beat just sitting around. Some of us were excellent cooks. On the 3rd day, we found the town square filled with pallets of chemical toilets, which we assembled and placed in the bathrooms, now reopened for use, even though there was still no running water. That was a relief, so to speak, as we could go back to relieving ourselves in more or less the usual manner, although it was nasty. It was like being trapped at Woodstock, but with no music. Water came back on the 4th day, and the boxes of food were never deficient. When we weren't cooking or cleaning up for ourselves, we were asked to attend what we called the re-education camp. We figured we must have been captured by Maoists. Only Maoists would have such naive faith in propaganda lectures. These bounced right off of us, and in fact, were a considerable source of mirth, as we were already educated and knew what was what. Still, it was either attend or get locked in rooms where nothing at all happened, so most of us were willing to listen to the propaganda of our captors rather than spend the day stuck in an empty room. The educational materials we were exposed to got universally bad reviews. So many cliches. First films of hungry people in poor places. It wasn't quite like looking at concentration camp footage, but the resemblances were there, and these images were of living people, often children. It was like looking at the longest charity advertisement ever made. We booed and made critical comments, but really the 2,500 most successful people in the world did not get to that status by being stupidly offensive. Often some diplomatic skill had been required and acquired. Also, we were pretty sure we were being filmed in order to be later packaged into some kind of re-education reality TV. So most of us just sat and watched the show and muttered to each other like you do in movie theaters. Thanks for the tip, Schultze. Schultze says, thanks for the reading. And it was despite all a sobering sight to see how the poorest on the earth still lived. Time travel to the 20th century, for sure. That we ourselves had no bathrooms and were a bit hungry, no doubt added to the effect of this footage, even when it was completely obvious that this was why they were doing it to us. The intended point of their pointless exercise, some kind of sick aversion therapy. Often statistics appeared on the big screen, yes, PowerPoint shows, a true punishment. That 0.1% of the human population owned half humanity's wealth, that was us. Yay! That half, the human population alive at that moment, had no assets except their own potential labor power, which was much weakened by poor health and education. That was definitely too bad. But blaming this on capitalism was wrong. We told these non-listening, boring people there would be 8 billion poor people if it weren't for capitalism. But whatever. The figures kept coming, graph after graph, repeated in ways that were not even close to compelling. Bored, sleepy, hypnotized, we tried to figure out Which ideological or ethnic group had assembled such a stew? And the soundtrack. Sad music, jaunty music, horribly unforgettable earworms destined to stick in your head forever, tragically depressing music. Like dirges played at 1/3 their intended speed, and so on. By now, the stresses of living rough and watching PowerPoint were getting to a lot of us. We were about to go into full Lord of the Flies mode. I encouraged people to suck up and deal, to enjoy it as kind of a vacation. It was still glamping, I told them. Who cares about this shit? But turns out quite a lot of them did care. These people are communists, they declared loudly. So what? I said. We were in a fucking commie glamping re-education camp. It was going to be a story we could tell in the bars for years to come. The finale to all the propaganda was a long lecture telling us that the current world order was only working for the elites. And even for us, it wouldn't work for long. We were simply strip mining the life world. As one Germanic voice from the screen put it, sounding like Werner Herzog to a lot of us, and I have no doubt he would have been involved, and that in German words like life world would be real world already. Those of us with some German had fun making more examples of this Herzogian English. Back translating, so to speak. Ich bin zu herzuschrocken. Ich bin zu reschmild. Ich bin großen Flugen, I can't even say this. Flugavensvers Pattingschmers. Okay, that's, the best I could do. Which last, for the un-Germanic among us, was explained to mean big airport delay sadness. A word even modern language should definitely have. An hour of film was then devoted to young people with wealthy parents. Earnestly apologetic or brashly arrogant, these made a sad fucking crew. It had to be a skewed sample. They had selected for awfulness, no doubt about it. And the crowd around me murmured objections. My kids aren't like that. No way. Although, as it went on and on, all kinds of pathetic, angry, supercilious kids, the room got quieter, and actually it became clear somehow that some of the whining faces on screen had an actual parent right there in the room. And the graphed statistics charting these rich kids were disheartening as well. If the various kinds of antidepressants used by them were aggregated, it could be made to look like well over 100% of them were on antidepressants, which, though clearly artifactual, was indeed depressing. Another chart graphed individual happiness in relations to personal wealth, and as so often that week and in life generally, it was another damn bell curve. This one showed that poverty made for unhappiness. Duh. Then people got quickly happier once adequacy was reached. Then, at a high middle-class income, the very income that scientists usually demanded for themselves, having studied their own graphs maybe, the guy next to me muttered darkly, as if to imply they were rigging either their study or the system of compensation or both. You got the highest happiness. Then, as wealth rose, happiness decreased. Not to the level of the poorest people, but far below the happiness of the middle peak. That middle income was the Goldilocks zone, the happy medium, haha. Or so the PowerPointers claimed. But we shook our heads knowingly. Statistics can prove anything, but they can never beat the obvious truth that more is better. The soundtrack here toggled between All You Need Is Love and Can't Buy Me Love to add ridiculous Beatles wisdom to this part of the show. It was actually getting pretty annoying at that point. How could it go on for so long? Where were the fucking Swiss police? Were they in on this? Was this a Swiss plot like the Red Cross or something? You are one of the Davos hostages, a voice said at the end of the income comparison film. You will have been a participant at the captured Davos. What will you do with that? We will be interested to watch you live the rest of your lives. With that, the incarceration ended. The drones in the airspace overhead flew away. Our helmeted guards were suddenly nowhere to be seen. We cheered when we realized this and told each other that our indoctrination had been a complete failure and a sad example of bankrupt leftist notions that couldn't get purchase in the great marketplace of ideas. It had been like getting flown in a time machine back to 1917 or 1848 or 1793, though few of us knew why these years in particular were named by those with history degrees. 1848? The real Swiss police finally appeared, to loud boos. Interpol was ordered to find the perpetrators, and the Swiss government came in for huge amounts of criticism, not to mention lawsuits for personal damages and emotional distress. They did their best to defend themselves from all this, saying it had been an unprecedented new form of hostage-taking, which could not be defended against in advance of knowing it could exist. A new thing, and none of us had died, not even been hurt much, except in our feelings. So much criticism of our life way, but we all had a lot of practice ignoring that kind of yelling. The dogs bark, the caravan moves on, and indeed, we all caravanned away as fast as we could. Back home, we found ourselves minor celebrities, and opportunities to tell our story would last forever. Some of us took that opportunity, others slipped back into comfortable anonymity. I myself decided to decompress in Tahiti. So, effect of this event on the real world, 0. So fuck you. Okay. That's a funny chapter. It's chapter 39. Oh, I'm going to take a little tea break. And if anybody spies my cat on screen, please let me know. I don't know where my cat is. He's probably sleeping somewhere, but he won't come out. Gene says 1848 was when the U.S. attacked and stole Mexican land. And it was time to try to get rid of kings in Europe, but it didn't go well. All right. Thanks for that, Gene. Depressing year for the regular person. Yeah. All right. Chapter 40. I can tell you I won't tell you that. Anyways, chapter 40. Jevons paradox proposes that increases in efficiency in the use of a resource lead to an overall increase in the use of this resource. We all know about Jevons paradox. Leads to an overall increase in the use of this resource, not a decrease. William Stanley Jevons, writing in 1865, was referring to the history of the use of coal. Once the Watt engine was introduced, which greatly increased the efficiency of coal burning as energy creation, the use of coal grew far beyond the initial reduction in the amount needed for the activity that existed before the time of the improvement. The rebound effect of this paradox can be mitigated only by adding other factors to the uptake of the more efficient method, such as requirements for reinvestment, taxes, and regulations. So they say in economics texts. The paradox is visible in the history of technological improvements of all kinds. Better car miles per gallon, more miles driven. Faster computer times, more time spent on computers. And so on ad infinitum. At this point, it is naive to expect that technological improvements alone will slow the impacts of growth and reduce the burden on the biosphere. And yet many still exhibit this naivete. Or you don't say. Associated with this lacuna in recent and current thought, perhaps a generalization of its particular focus, is the assumption that efficiency is always good. Of course, efficiency as a measure has been constructed to describe outcomes considered in advance to be good. So it's almost a tautology, but the two can still be de-stranded as they are not quite the same. Examination of the historical record and simple exercises in reductio ad absurdum, like Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, should make it obvious that efficiency can become a bad thing for humans. Jevons' paradox applies here too, but economics has normally not been flexible enough to take on this obvious truth, and it is very common to see writing in economics refer to efficiency as good by definition and inefficient as simply a synonym for bad or poorly done. But the evidence shows that there is good efficiency and bad efficiency, good inefficiency and bad inefficiency. Examples of all four can easily be provided, though here we leave that as an exercise for the reader, with just these simple pointers to stimulate reflection. Preventative healthcare saves enormous amounts in medical costs later and is good efficiency. Eating your extra children, this is Swift's character's modest proposal, would be a bad efficiency. Any harm to people for profit is likewise bad, no matter how efficient. Using an oversized vehicle to get from point A to point B is a bad inefficiency, and there are many more like it. But oxbows in a river defining a large floodplain is a good inefficiency. On and on it goes like this. All four categories and further consideration of the analysis of the largest situation is to be helpful. It also makes me think of the efficiency of travel and of all kinds of transportation and the lifestyle of comfort that we lead is very efficient, right? And so you have the need for people to go work out, right? To get exercise. Because they're not doing labor anymore. And they're not traveling by foot or bicycle or, right, something human powered. So the efficiency of technology in the as it relates to how humans operate has to be compensated for, right? Because otherwise you get, you lose all your muscle tone, you lose your muscles, and you lose your mobility, and you become weak and sedentary, right? That's the first thing that jumped in my mind for that, but lots of other examples. The orienting principle that could guide all such thinking is often left out, but surely it should be included and maybe explicit. We should be doing everything needed to avoid a mass extinction event. This suggests a general operating principle similar to the Leopoldian land ethic, often summarized as what's good is what's good for the land. In our current situation, the phrase can be usefully reworded as what's good is what's good for the biosphere. In light of that principle, many efficiencies are quickly seen to be profoundly destructive, and many inefficiencies can now be understood as unintentionally salvational. Robustness and resilience are in general inefficient, but they are robust and they are resilient. And we need that by design. The whole field and discipline of economics by which we plan and justify what we do as a society is simply riddled with absences, contradictions, logical flaws, and most important of all, false axioms and false goals. We must fix that if we can. It would require going deep and restructuring the entire field of thought. If economics is a method for optimizing various objective functions subject to constraints, then the focus of change would need to look again at those objective functions. Not profit, but biosphere health should be the function solved for. And this would change many things. It means moving the inquiry from economics to political economy, and that would be the necessary step to get the economics right. Why do we do things? What do we want? What would be fair? How can we best arrange our lives together on this planet? Our current economics has not yet answered any of these questions, but why should it? Do you ask your calculator what to do with your life? No, you have to figure that one out for yourself. That was chapter 40. We're going to move on to chapter 41 after a quick tea break. Chapter 41. In the 12th year of continuous drought, our city ran out of water. Of course, we had been warned it would happen, but even in droughts, some rain occasionally falls, and with conservation and fallowing of agriculture and construction of new reservoirs and pipelines to distant watersheds and digging of deeper wells and all the rest of those efforts, we had always squeaked through. And that in itself made us think it would keep on going that way. But one September there was an earthquake, not a very strong one, but apparently enough to shift something in the aquifer below us, and very quickly all the wells went dry, and the reservoirs were already dry, and the neighboring watersheds connected to us by pipeline were dry. Nothing came out of the taps. September 11th, 2034. Our city is home to about 1 million people. About a third of those had moved to town in the last decade and were living in cardboard shacks in the hilly districts on the west side. This was partly another result of the drought. They were already living without running water, buying it in 100-liter barrels or just cans and jugs. The rest of us were in houses and used to water coming out of the tap, of course. So on this day, there was no question that the housed residents were most distressed by the change. For the poor in the hills, it wasn't a change, except in this sense, there was no longer any water to buy either. In our part of the world, you can only live a couple of days without water. I suppose that's true everywhere, and this cessation of water, despite all the warnings and preparations, was sudden. Taps running, perhaps weekly, but running. Then on September 11th, not. Panic, of course, hoarding for sure, if one could do it. Many of us had already filled our bathtubs, but that wasn't going to last long. A rush to the city's river, but it was still dry. In fact, drier than ever. And then, no other choice, none at all. A rush to the public buildings, to the football stadium, the government house, and places like that. We needed a solution. In from the coast came trucks with water from the desalination plants. Also, a convoy appeared from inland. These vehicles included water trucks, also mobile machines that could suck water from the air. Even dry air, like ours, humidity of 10% feels dry as a bone on the skin, but that air still has a lot of water in it, luckily for us. It had to be done in an orderly way. That was clear to everyone. You could fight your way to the front of the line, but to what effect? There was nothing there to grab. Whatever water there was in the city was guarded by the military. The army and police were out in force. They directed people to stadiums and indoor assembly places like gymnasiums and libraries, and assembly halls of all kinds, and ordered us to get into lines, and water was brought to those places in heavily guarded trucks. And there was nothing to do then but wait your turn with your containers and receive your allotted amount and then start conserving it. Everything relied on the whole system working. If it didn't, we would die, one way or another, from thirst or from fighting each other. This was all completely clear to everyone but the crazies among us. There are always such people, and in this case they were outnumbered 100 to 1 at least, and subdued by the police if they made trouble. For the rest of us, it came down to this. We had to trust our society to work well enough to save us, and it had never worked very well before. This was a really big leap of faith for sure. No one was confident, but it was the system or death. So we congregated in the places announced over the radio and online and on the streets themselves and waited our turn. Water kept coming into the city on trucks or was dragged out of the air by the machines. The initial allotments were ridiculously small. We had enough to drink, but not enough to cook with. Quickly, we learned to drink any water we did use for cooking, treating it as a soup. Conservation was taken to ridiculous levels. Many bought filters, said to clarify urine back to potable water. Sure, why not? We bought some too. But other methods of conservation were a bit more practical. Those filters don't last very long. It was sobering in all of this to see how many we were. You congregate the whole population into just a few places, and you see how many you are. And all of them strangers. In a city of a million, you would know something like what, 100 people? Maybe 500 faces? At most 1,000. So you know at most 1% in 1,000. Walk into a full football stadium where you all have come to file through the line with your water jugs in hand or on dollies, water being so amazingly heavy, and you see that everyone there is a stranger. You are alone in a city of strangers. That's every day of your life. We saw that undeniably, right there with our own eyes, alone in the city, just a few friends, a family of sorts. These friends make but so few. And them all lost in the larger crowd, doing business elsewhere. Well, people hung together with those they knew, sure, to go get water, possibly to protect each other from the crazies if someone lost it or something. But that seldom happened. We were so afraid that we behaved well. That was how bad it was. Mostly we went with friends just for the company, because it was very strange to see with your own eyes that you live among strangers. Even though every night of your life, when you go into a restaurant and don't see anyone you know, that's the same thing. Those are strangers. But they are your fellow citizens. This is what makes it less than desolating. Your fellow citizens are a real thing, a real feeling. Seeing this, my friend Charlotte pointed something out to me one day as we stood in line waiting for a refill, feeling unwashed and parched and apprehensive. Charlotte's usual cynical, sardonic attitude, now almost jaunty, almost amused, she gestured at the line in front of us and said, "Remember what Margaret Thatcher said? There is no such thing as society. We laughed out loud. For a while, we couldn't stop laughing. Fuck Margaret Thatcher, I said when I could catch my breath. And I say it again now. Fuck Margaret Thatcher. And fuck every idiot who thinks that way. I can take them all to a place where they will eat those words or die of thirst. Because when the taps run dry, society becomes very real. A smelly mass of unwashed, anxious citizens, no doubt about it. But a society for sure. It's a life or death thing, society. And I think people mainly do recognize that. And the people who deny it are stupid fuckers. I say this unequivocally, ignorant fools. That kind of stupidity should be put in jail. Then on the 23rd day of our crisis, on October 4th, it rained. Not just the ambivalent sea mist we often get in the fall, but a real storm. Out of nowhere. How we collected that rainwater, individually and civically. The rain fell on our heads and in our containers, and I don't think a single drop of it made it downstream in our little river out of the city limits. We caught it all, and we danced, yes, of course. It was a carnival for sure, even though we knew it wasn't the total solution, not even close, as the drought was forecast to continue, and we still didn't have a good plan. Nevertheless, we danced in the rain. All right, that was chapter 41. I think I'm going to end it there, y'all. And don't think I have anyone else to thank. I did thank Schulte. You're the man, Schulte. Hold on one second. Let me get the phone. I'll be right back. Luckily, my phone wasn't that far away. Just making sure I don't miss anybody. If I have anybody to thank. Don't know that I do. No, I think that's it. All right, guys. Put on my headphones so I can end the show. Thanks for hanging out for the old book reading. And I think I'll probably try to do it again next Friday. So we'll, try and make this like a regular Friday thing, just so we can get through this book. It's a good book. I'd like to finish it this year. It would be great. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you. Don't know if I'll show up this weekend. I'm not really sure. But most definitely we'll see you on Monday. Either at 11 or 4 or both. Okay. All right. Thanks, y'all. Until next time. Peace.